Hello, everybody. We're going to get started if you don't mind. Thanks to all of you for coming here today. My name is Ovik Roy. I'm a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute's Center for Medical Progress. And we're delighted to have David Goldhill join us this afternoon for a talk about his new book, Catastrophic: How American Healthcare Killed My Father and How to Fix It. I think that there's two. When I think about healthcare, I think of two challenges or blind spots that I think conservatives have had on healthcare. The first is that it tends to be liberals who criticize and critique our healthcare system, largely because of the large uninsured population. And the reflexive, intuitive response of conservatives has been to say, well, the healthcare system is just fine. It's the best healthcare system in the world. Don't mess with it. Don't change it. And I think the second blind spot of conservatives in general, but certainly in healthcare, is that we tend to talk about policy, public policy, philosophically or with charts and data. And charts and data are important, and first principles are important. But a lot of times, the way liberals have won arguments is by talking about the single mother in Oregon who doesn't have health insurance and what we need to do to help her, or the child who's born with cystic fibrosis and how that child can't get health insurance. And these are real challenges in our system. And there are other challenges that people who are actually insured, who have coverage, who are set up in the way that we all think they should be, who struggle with the convolutedness, the expense, and the mistakes that arise in our healthcare system. So with reflection of those two things, or in reflection of those two things, it's not that surprising that it took a lifelong Democrat, David Goldhill, to write a cover story in The Atlantic about how American healthcare killed his father. American healthcare did not kill his father because David's father was uninsured. David's father had insurance. He was on Medicare. But because of the unresponsiveness and all the incentives in our system that lead the American healthcare system to not really be that concerned about the patient first and foremost, David's father tragically died, and I'm sure he'll talk more about that when in his remarks. So what's really great about David Goldhill's writing and David's book is that he not only talks about the real people in our system who are affected, not just the uninsured, but every American who interacts with our healthcare system and sees it in a way that makes us understand how much better our system could be. But he critiques it from a free market point of view. He appreciates that there are so many things about our healthcare system that could be better precisely because it doesn't hew to market principles. One of the great cliches in healthcare policy debates is that healthcare is different, that healthcare is somehow immune from the laws of economics that affect every other aspect of how we live. And what David has done in his book is a great service in that regard, in explaining how, in fact, healthcare is much like other sectors of the economy. David grew up in New York, outside of New York City in Nassau County. His father was a psychiatrist. He went to Harvard College and then got a master's at NYU. He then became an investment banker doing mortgage finance at Morgan Stanley and Lehman Brothers, where he had a front row seat into Fannie and Freddie, which something we might hear more from him in the Q&A. Then he got involved in television, and he is the CEO of the Game Show Network, and came to health policy writing very late in life because of this tragedy that affected his father. He wrote this cover story in the Atlantic magazine called How American Healthcare Killed My Father, and then turned that into a book. And it's an incredibly compelling book, which I encourage all of you to buy. There's copies outside. And I'm also instructed to say that the next season of American Bible Challenge, the Game Show Network's highest-rated show, is coming on in a few weeks. So the Game Show Network can feel like we're not stealing its CEO from his CEO duties, and we're giving them a plug too. So please join me in welcoming David Goldhill. I'm sure we're going to learn a lot from him today.
Thank you, Ovik. I'm sure everyone in here reads your blog, but it's a thrill when as a sort of outsider, non-expert, you're mentioned in something that you admire and read so often. So I thank you for that and for the introduction today. And thank you, everybody, for coming. I am here really because of what happened to my father. It is what got me interested in healthcare. Some of you may know the story. My dad died of an infection he acquired in a hospital, a series of infections, actually, and it was very painful, as you can imagine, and a very difficult experience to go through. Even worse for my sister, who's an emergency room physician and watched sort of helplessly as my father's care was botched. About 6 weeks after my dad died, I read an article in the New Yorker by Atul Gawande about hospital-acquired infections, which I really had known nothing about, and read about a statistic many of you are probably familiar with, that somewhere around 100,000 Americans die every year from hospital infections. I'm sorry. Let me start again. Somewhere around 100,000 people die a year from hospital-acquired infections, and that most of them are fairly easily preventable. Not all of them, but most of them, and that doctors who had designed protocols to prevent them had failed to convince hospitals to adopt them, even though they were relatively low cost. I used to run a movie theater chain, among many of the jobs I've held for incredibly short periods of time. And, you know, when someone spilled a soda on the floor, we had a rule as to how quickly you had to mop it up so no one slipped and fell. And then you read about an industry where 100,000 people die, and they could fix it and it wouldn't cost much, but they don't. And I think the combination of the grief I felt for losing my father and the sort of businessman's curiosity about how other businesses are run made me wonder, why do we give this industry a pass about so much? I think all of you in this room, and it's one of the great things about talking about healthcare, have been patients or have had loved ones who are patients. And there's roughly 310 million people in this country who have a story about healthcare that we should say, well, why do we give this industry a pass? We would never accept this in anything. And yet we do in healthcare. And Avik's right that a lot of us say, well, it's healthcare. It's fundamentally different. And what I want to talk about today is two things. One is how really it isn't fundamentally different, but the way we've come to think of it is. And I think it's blinding us to the change in healthcare that has occurred since the first assumptions that guide our system and many other systems became conventional wisdom. And the second, and unfortunately more briefly, is what I think we can do about it to begin to fix these problems. To me, the answer to the question of why healthcare in this country is so expensive, so wasteful, at the same time so often unavailable to people who need it, so unsafe, and delivers such unbelievably bad customer service that we don't even think of it as customer service, is really the punchline to a number of off-color jokes, which I won't tell, but the punchline is because they can. And to me, it's the most fundamental and important thing to understand about healthcare, is that nobody else in any other service or good trying to get your business can get away with this. They can't. Someone will take your business from them. That's not the case in healthcare. In healthcare, we've built a system that has the most perverse incentives imaginable. It's for more care over good care, more expensive care over less expensive care, and less investment in the kind of things that tell your patient customers that you care about them, which is safety and service and handling of information and all the other little things we see. And it's great in politics to find a villain for this. It's the evil drug companies or insurers or the unions or whoever your villain is. But the problem is, if you spend any time in healthcare, what you find are people who are often so motivated they're almost saints. There are people who are devoting their whole lives to the care of others. Even in many of the evil institutions, you will find lots of people who got into it and are still in it because they think they're helping others. And so you have this interesting mix of a system that I regard as catastrophic in a number of ways, and people who seem to be motivated by great reasons for being there. And to me, the bridge between understanding those two is just the incentives in the system. The economic incentives for bad outcomes are so powerful that it overwhelms the efforts of good-intentioned people. And not exactly a very politically catchy phrase, right? down with the incentives is not going to get anyone elected to power. But I think it's the